Yes, indeed. Welcome, everyone. Cannabis News with Joe Klare for April 24th, 2018, presented by the Marijuana Times. Check us out at marijuanatimes.org. See everything that's going on over there. A lot of great articles from a bunch of great writers, including myself. Also, every episode of Cannabis News can be found at marijuanatimes.org, easily shareable with your social media networks. You can also find all of our social media networks linked at marijuanatimes.org. So make sure you check out all of those. Today we're talking about a new survey from the Colorado Department of Transportation. Also update you on what we talked about last week, Epidiolex, I believe is how it's pronounced. Probably got it wrong. I know one thing. I nailed the pronunciation last week. I may have butchered it there, but we'll get into the story and find out here shortly. We have an update on that, and as that drug moves through the FDA approval process. Also, a new poll from CBS News shows how popular marijuana legalization is in the United States. Talking about all of that, of course. Before we do all that, we talk about NatureSideCannabis.com, a proud sponsor of Cannabis News with Joe Klare. NatureSideCannabis.com. Check out their awesome, organic, all-natural pesticides, grow safe and poison-free, and be regulatory compliant. You can do all of that with NatureSideCannabis.com. If you're a cannabis cultivator, you don't want to use harmful chemicals, you want to pass regulations, you don't want to use harmful pesticides or pesticides that aren't allowed by the state government of the state you're growing in, NatureSideCannabis.com. Solve all of those problems in one fell swoop, as the kids say. So go check them out, NatureSideCannabis.com. Our first story is from MarijuanaTimes.org by yours truly. New survey from Colorado focuses on driving under the influence of marijuana. The Colorado Department of Transportation, they conducted a survey of about 11,000 anonymous drivers, marijuana users, and non-marijuana users alike to get their responses to a wide range of topics about impairment and driving. Almost 70% of respondents said they have driven under the influence of marijuana at least once in the past year, and 27% said they do so almost daily. As you can imagine, that statistic sent ripples of shock through Colorado and the state governments and politicians and so on and so forth. We'll get to more of that in a second. CDOT Communications Manager Sam Cole said, quote, "What this information tells us is that Colorado still has a lot of work to do in order to change behavior. CDOT has been successful in raising awareness about the laws and consequences of driving high, but now our big focus is on how we can turn that awareness into action and increase safety on our roadways." The survey itself mentioned that there were 51 fatalities in a single year involving people who tested positive for THC in their system. As we all know, you can have THC in your system if you smoked 2 weeks ago. That doesn't obviously mean you're impaired when you're involved in a fatal car accident. So at most, that number is 51 for an entire year, considering the tens of thousands of drivers that are on the roadways each day in Colorado. Now look, I'm not saying, and I've never said, and I've always said what I'm about to say, which is that no one's encouraging you to get behind the wheel of a vehicle if you're stoned. No one is saying that that's a great idea. That's something you should go do. A lot has to do with tolerance, the potency of what you're doing, how used you are, how used to driving under the influence of marijuana you are. There are differences, obviously, with alcohol. It's much safer to drive on marijuana than it is alcohol. Doesn't mean you should go and do it. The point is to keep these things in perspective and not demonize all cannabis users as crazy people who are slamming into other people on the roadways. Now, I did some digging on the numbers, and look, in the last few years, the number of traffic accidents involving fatalities has gone up. The number of fatalities in traffic accidents has gone up. And it's been going up for several years. Now, obviously, people who are against legalization will be quick to jump on that and say, look, we're legalizing marijuana, the deaths are going up. A couple of problems with that. First of all, there's a statistic known as fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, which is a way of looking at how many fatalities there are on the roadways compared to how much people are actually driving. So it's right now we're in the U.S. we're a little over one traffic fatality per 100 million miles traveled. That number used to be much higher. It's been unchanged practically since 2009. And It's at the lowest level it's ever been since they started doing the statistic. It goes back all the way to 1921. Another thing people will not point out, even though there are tens of millions of more vehicles on the roadways today than there were decades ago, the total number of fatalities with less vehicles on less roadways, because obviously more roads have been built since the 1970s and 80s, less vehicles on less roadways. Every single year from 1963 to 1991, there were more traffic fatalities than there were in the last several years during this increase. So there's no correlation, and there's studies that show the opposite. There's no correlation between legalization and traffic fatalities being on the rise. You can check out all that out in the story on Marijuana Times. Again, like I said, the point of all this is to point out that we have to keep things in perspective. Legalization of cannabis doesn't equal tons of stoned people on the roadways slamming into each other. It's just has not appeared since legalization has come about. That has not been conjured up. None of that has happened. Obviously, people who are against legalization will beg to differ, but they're wrong. So there you go. That's why I watch this show, not them. Next story. From BusinessInsider.com, a powerful drug derived from marijuana just got a major green light on its way to FDA approval. An experimental drug derived from cannabis to treat epilepsy is on the brink of becoming the first of its kind to win U.S. government approval. We talked about this story last week. We talked about a positive review that the drug got from the FDA. Epidiolex. I think that's right. That's what I said before. Epidiolex. Anyway, it's made by GW Pharmaceuticals, designed to treat two rare forms of epilepsy using CBD. Last week, as I said, they got a positive review notation, whatever you want to call it, comment from the FDA. On Thursday of last week, a panel of outside experts convened by the Food and Drug Administration voted unanimously in favor of the drug's safety and effectiveness. The recommendation will play a key role in the FDA's approval decision for the drug. The drug is made by GW Pharmaceuticals, as I just said. If the FDA gives its final approval, and a decision is expected in June of this year, the new drug would be sold under the name Epidiolex as a syrup. It will be the first drug whose active ingredient is cannabidiol, the compound in marijuana thought to be responsible for many of its therapeutic effects. So in other words, this drug, which is, when you get right down to it, it's good. More anything derived from cannabis that makes its march forward through the FDA process, gets, quote unquote establishment approval, is a good thing. A lot of people actually obviously worry that they're going to be the things that FDA approves, and they're going to push out everybody else, and that's going to suck. But in the end, it's medicine to people who need it. Now, whether the FDA will be as fair when it comes to actual cannabis, because this thing was fast-tracked. If you go through it goes through the whole history of this drug going through the FDA approval process. It was fast-tracked by the FDA. Whether whole flower, whole plant cannabis will get that kind of treatment is not likely. But again, in the end, at least some people, mostly children, will legally and will have access to something that makes their quality of life better. Whether it ultimately becomes a good thing for the cannabis community, it could go either way. It could continue the momentum. It could cut out whole plant cannabis from ever being considered medicine by the federal government. I'm a cynical, skeptical person at heart. That's my default position, but I don't think that's where this is going to go. I think this is a stepping stone to whole plant cannabis eventually getting the golden seal of approval from the FDA, which is really not. Tens of thousands of people die every year from FDA-approved drugs. Not the stamp or guarantee of safety in any way, shape, or form. It's just it looks good for the establishment. They say, well, this is an FDA-approved drug, and then there's nothing you can say because, well, the FDA approved it, so it must be awesome, awesome stuff, not counting the FDA-approved drugs that killed all those people. But, don't worry about that. It's the perception that matters, and I think it will continue the perception of cannabis as a medicine on the whole and continue the momentum in that direction. This last story from CBSNews.com, support for legal marijuana remains high. Yes, there's always a pun. Granted, there's a lot of words associated with the cannabis community, so the opportunity and the statistical odds of there being a pun are high, but still. Most Americans, 6 in 10, think marijuana should be legal. Supporters of legalization are especially likely to think it is less dangerous than other drugs. You see the poll right there asking, people asked, or CBS asked rather, if marijuana should be legal. 59% said yes, 36% said no. As recently as 2011, just over half of Americans said marijuana use should not be legal. We'll get you that point of the poll in a second. 6 in 10 think legalizing marijuana should be left up to each state government to decide rather than to be decided by the federal government, a view that cuts across party lines, as you see the poll right there. When asked who should determine whether marijuana is legal, 61% said state governments and 33% said the federal government should be in charge. 51% of Americans say alcohol is more dangerous than marijuana. Only 9% think marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol. More than 6 in 10 Americans, 63%, say marijuana is less dangerous than most other drugs, particularly those who have tried marijuana themselves. See that poll right there. Obviously, people are realizing that marijuana is in no way as harmful as other substances you can put in your body, which includes alcohol. Now, support for legalization has been growing. See there, in July of 1979, support was at 27%. By 2011, it was only up to 40%. And then 2013, it started making a precipitous climb, 45% in 2013, 56% in 2016, 61% last year. The poll was dipped a little bit in 59% to 59%, but obviously that's within the margin of error. So support remains pretty steady and pretty high. Yes, that's right. I can do cannabis puns as well. Hi. See, I just did another one. I'm unstoppable. So once you get going, that's why I get out. I gotta end the show. Once you get going with the marijuana puns, well, you may never want a pot. Oh well. I stretched a little bit for that one, but you get my point. Thanks everybody for checking out the show. Please continue to share and like and comment. Share with your social media networks. Tell people in real life. Subscribe on YouTube and on Facebook for the videos. Apple Podcasts. Check us out on there for the audio-only version of the show. Thank you to natureside Cannabis.com for being a proud sponsor of the show. Check out the organic, all-natural pesticides. This has been Cannabis News for April 24th, 2018. Thanks everybody for checking out the show, sharing the show, all of that. And we'll see you next time on Cannabis News.